The 85-year-old man accidentally bumped into a motorcycle parked along the curb. The enraged biker lunged forward, punching him straight in the face, ignoring his apologies, ignoring his faded veteran's jacket. Bystanders remained silent, everyone looking away. But just 30 minutes later, engines roared in the distance as an armed military team swarmed the area. Think the elderly are always defenseless? Type honor if you believe dignity should be protected at all costs. Edward Ed Mitchell was an 85-year-old retired Marine who had served his country proudly for 3 decades. His body may have grown frail, but his spirit remained as strong as the day he first donned his uniform back in 1955. That morning, Ed had walked to the local supermarket to buy bread and milk. Simple errands that had become increasingly difficult as arthritis claimed more of his mobility each year. He wore his old Marine Corps jacket, not for attention, but because it was the warmest thing he owned and provided comfort on chilly mornings. The parking lot was crowded that day. Shoppers hurried past, focused on their phones and shopping lists. No one noticed the elderly man carefully navigating the maze of cars and carts, his weathered hands clutching his grocery bags. As Ed made his way toward the bus stop, his arms heavy with groceries, he accidentally bumped into a gleaming black motorcycle parked near the sidewalk. The contact was minimal, barely enough to rock the bike on its stand, but the sound caught the attention of a group of bikers gathered nearby. Ed immediately stopped, turning to assess any damage. Finding none, he still bowed his head respectfully toward the group. "I'm terribly sorry, boys," he said, his voice shaking slightly with age. "My hands aren't what they used to be. No harm intended." One of the bikers, a tall man with heavily tattooed arms and a leather vest, stalked toward Ed, his face contorted with disproportionate rage. "You just touched my baby, you worthless old man," he snarled, looming over Ed, who stood barely 5 feet tall now, his spine curved with age. Ed blinked in confusion. I only bumped it accidentally." Without warning, the biker's fist connected with Ed's face. A vicious blow that sent the elderly veteran sprawling onto the concrete, his groceries scattered across the pavement, milk pooling around broken glass, bread crushed beneath his fallen body. Bystanders gasped but remained frozen in place. A young supermarket employee stepped outside, hesitated, then retreated back into the store as if he'd seen nothing. Blood trickled from Ed's nose and split lip as he clutched his worn veteran's cap, which had fallen from his head during the fall. The gold Marine Corps emblem gleamed dully in the morning light, unnoticed by everyone present. The biker returned to his friends, laughing callously. "Don't mess with government freeloaders," he called over his shoulder. Ed struggled to sit up, not reaching for his phone to call police, not crying out for help, just trying to gather what remained of his dignity along with his spilled groceries. His hands trembled as he attempted to mop blood from his face with an old handkerchief embroidered with the Marine Corps emblem. An elderly woman walking past shook her head sympathetically, but didn't stop to help. A young mother pulled her curious child away, hushing questions about the bleeding man. Ed finally managed to reach a nearby bench, his breath coming in painful gasps. His military training had taught him to endure physical pain, but nothing had prepared him for the deeper wound of being so thoroughly devalued, of realizing that the country he had risked his life for no longer saw him as someone worth defending. As he sat there, shoulders slumped and bleeding, Ed Mitchell was more alone than he had ever been in the jungles of Vietnam or the deserts of the Middle East. In those places, he had always had his brothers in arms beside him. Now, surrounded by fellow citizens in a peaceful American suburb, no one stood with him. No one remembered that the frail old man with blood on his face had once been the shield between them and those who would destroy their freedom. No one recognized that the trembling hands that now couldn't hold groceries had once held the line against tyranny in battles whose names they'd long forgotten. Unknown to everyone, a young employee in the supermarket had witnessed everything through the store window. His name was Ryan Garcia, a college student working part-time to pay for school. Without drawing attention to himself, Ryan discreetly pulled out his phone and sent a text message to someone whose contact name read simply, "Commander. Sir, you need to come right away. Your father has been assaulted." Just 15 minutes later, the distant rumble of powerful engines cut through the ordinary sounds of the shopping center. A military-grade SUV, followed by 3 smaller Humvees, swept into the parking lot with precision that suggested years of tactical driving. The vehicles parked in perfect formation, blocking any potential exit routes. A man in combat fatigues emerged from the lead vehicle. Major Jason Mitchell, Ed's son, and the commander of a rapid response unit from the nearby military base. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he scanned the area and spotted his father still sitting on the bench. Blood now dried on his weathered face. Jason strode directly toward his father, his bearing immediately identifying him as someone accustomed to command. The military personnel accompanying him, 12 soldiers in total, spread out strategically across the parking lot without needing verbal direction. "Who did this?" Jason asked, his voice tight with restrained emotion as he knelt before his father. The supermarket employee who had texted him stepped forward, pointing toward the group of bikers who were still lounging beside their motorcycles, seemingly unconcerned about the elderly man they had assaulted. Jason stood slowly, turned, and nodded almost imperceptibly to his team. The soldiers moved silently into position. They carried no weapons, but their presence created an immediate change in the atmosphere of the parking lot. Conversations died mid-sentence. Shoppers stood motionless, sensing something significant was unfolding. Jason approached the biker who had struck his father. The man stood up aggressively, his posture shifting from relaxed to defensive. "Who the hell are you two?" the biker began. Jason held up his military ID. "I'm the person who's going to ensure that this veteran and every other veteran receives the respect they've earned." The biker's face drained of color as he registered the military uniform surrounding him, the disciplined formation of soldiers who now effectively controlled the parking lot, and the cold determination in Jason's eyes. Unlike the biker, Jason used no violence. Instead, he simply radioed the local police, who arrived within minutes. This time, with military personnel as witnesses, the officers had no choice but to take the assault seriously. The biker was handcuffed and placed in the police cruiser as a crowd gathered to watch. As the perpetrator was being led away, Jason returned to his father, knelt down, and gently cleaned the blood from his face with a first aid kit from one of the vehicles. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, loud enough only for his father to hear. "I should have been here sooner." The onlookers, many of whom had earlier pretended not to see the assault, began removing their hats, bowing their heads in belated respect. An elderly veteran among the crowd stood at attention and offered a formal military salute to Ed. Like a wave, the gesture spread through the gathering as people of all ages found themselves standing straighter, acknowledging not just the man before them, but what he represented. There are moments that remind us that honor isn't found in words, but in how we treat those who have silently sacrificed for us. If you believe gratitude should be protected fiercely, type honor right now to stand with those who defended our freedom. News of the incident spread rapidly through social media and local television. What began as a few shaky cell phone videos soon became a national conversation about respect for veterans and societal indifference to their plight. Citizens from across the town and across the country expressed outrage at the violence perpetrated against an elderly veteran. Letters, flowers, and get-well cards flooded Ed's modest home from people he had never met, but who had been moved by his story. A local veterans organization arranged a small ceremony to honor Ed, not just for the recent incident, but for his lifetime of service that had gone largely unacknowledged. The ceremony, originally planned as a small gathering, swelled as hundreds of community members asked to attend. At the event, the Master of Ceremonies read aloud Ed's service record: 32 years in the United States Marine Corps, participation in 3 major overseas campaigns, recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, personal rescue of 9 fellow Marines during an ambush in Kandahar, distinguished service in military intelligence during operations that remain classified to this day. As each achievement was read, details that Ed himself had never boasted about, the audience's respect visibly deepened. People who had passed him on the street for years without a second glance now realized they had been walking past living history. When Ed's name was called, the entire auditorium rose as one, applauding with a thunderous ovation that continued for nearly 5 minutes. Ed sat in his wheelchair, hands trembling, tears streaming down his deeply lined face. The man who had faced enemy fire without flinching now found himself overcome by this long overdue acknowledgement. His son, Major Jason, stepped onto the stage and knelt before his father in a gesture of profound respect. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone, "you fought for our freedom. Today, let me fight for your honor." During a media interview following the ceremony, a reporter asked Ed if he harbored resentment toward the man who had assaulted him. Ed shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. I'm only sorry that perhaps he never learned to be grateful." That simple statement, an extension of forgiveness rather than revenge, moved many in the audience to tears. Here was a man who, even after being physically attacked, retained the moral compass that had guided him through decades of service. After the ceremony, the city mayor signed an executive order renaming a major street Veteran Ed Mitchell Way, a permanent reminder of the quiet sacrifices made by aging warriors still walking among us. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome came from the biker himself. Following his arrest and the publicity surrounding the case, James "Tank" Weber requested a meeting with Ed before his sentencing hearing. Initially reluctant, Ed eventually agreed. In the small conference room at the courthouse, Weber, now without his leather vest and bravado, sat across from the man he had assaulted. His head was bowed, his hands clasped tightly before him. "Sir," he began, his voice barely audible, "my father was a Vietnam vet. He came back broken, drank himself to death when I was 12. I grew up hating everything military because it took him from me." Ed listened silently as the younger man continued. "When I saw your jacket, something in me just snapped. It wasn't about you. It was about him. About all the pain." Weber looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm starting therapy now, and I'm doing community service at the VA hospital, whether the judge orders it or not." Ed reached across the table and placed his weathered hand on the biker's tattooed arm. "Then something good has come from this after all." The judge, moved by this reconciliation, sentenced Weber to probation conditional on continued therapy and community service working with veterans, a decision Ed supported. Weber later became a regular volunteer at the local VA, helping veterans with mobility issues get to their appointments. "Sometimes," Ed told his son afterward, "the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's turning them into a friend." Every morning, Ed Mitchell visits the local park, wearing his old veteran's cap, coffee cup in hand, watching people pass by. His routine rarely changes, but the way people respond to him has. Now strangers stop to shake his hand. Parents point him out to their children, explaining in hushed tones about sacrifice and service. What once was invisibility has become a quiet celebrity, though Ed himself remains unchanged by the attention. One day, a young boy approached him tentatively. "Sir, were you really a hero?" the child asked. Ed smiled gently, ruffling the boy's hair. "Real heroes don't need anyone to know who they are. They just need to remember why they stood up." The incident that had begun with violence transformed into something entirely different, a community awakening. The local school district introduced a Veterans in Classrooms program, inviting former service members to share their experiences with students. The police department implemented specialized training for officers on interacting with elderly veterans who might be suffering from PTSD or other service-related conditions. Ed himself was invited to participate in the training, providing insights that only someone with his experience could offer. His quiet dignity and forgiveness became as much a part of the training as the procedural elements. On Veterans Day that year, the ceremony at the newly named Veteran Ed Mitchell Way drew a record crowd. Among them stood James Weber, now a volunteer coordinator for veteran transportation services, standing respectfully beside men and women in uniform. Honor isn't something you wear. It's etched into your quietest actions, revealed in how you treat others, especially when no one seems to be watching. In the shade of an old oak tree, the elderly Marine continues his daily vigil, a silent but enduring symbol of courage that transcends time and circumstance. If you believe that kindness, honor, and sacrifice never go out of style, subscribe to TT Hero Stories. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.